G'day guys, I'm Ryan Pickles and welcome to the first episode of Pickels Pickles, a new series of videos where I'm going to show you what I've been fermenting, culturing, dehydrating and of course pickling over the last few months. So whether you're a fermenting veteran, you're keen to give it a go, or you just want to see me make some weird food, I'm sure we'll have some fun. So let's get started. So for my first video, I'm going to show you one of my favourite things to ferment, and that's kimchi. Now if you've ever been to a Korean restaurant, they would have brought you out some little side dishes with your meal, which would invariably include kimchi. So kimchi is made by fermenting vegetables, usually cabbage and radish, in a chili paste. And it's perfect for our first video because it's flavourful, it's easy to make, it doesn't take long to ferment, and most importantly, it's pretty hard to screw up. So let's get to it. Now one of the great things about fermenting is that you don't actually need that much to do it. You just need your ingredients and something to put them in. Now in Korea, traditionally they use these clay pots called ongi, but I'm just going to use glass jars. Now when it comes to your jar, you really want something that's good quality glass and a lid that can get a good airtight seal. Now I got these from Target, they were about $3 each and they're pretty good value for the price. Now you can use a big jar, like a 2-litre jar, or I just tend to use two smaller 1-litre jars. And these ingredients should fill up these 2 jars just fine. Now as for ingredients, we've got wombok. Now this is your main ingredient in your kimchi. It's also known as Napa cabbage or Chinese cabbage. Use about 1 kilo or 1 kilo and a little bit. Buy a little bit more than you need because you'll inevitably lose a few leaves when you start breaking it down. And for every kilo of cabbage, use about 250 grams of daikon radish. It's also known as lobok in some stores, and I like to use a little bit more because I like the taste of the radish. Here we've got 4 spring onions and a carrot. So these are the vegetables we're going to be fermenting, and we're going to need some salt to prepare them. Now feel free to make some substitutions and additions depending on what you like. Now the carrot's not really essential. I've made it a couple of times with carrot, a couple of times without carrot. Doesn't add too much to the flavour, but it does add a nice colour, so I like to use it. Other things I'll do is I'll get rid of one of the spring onions and I'll have some Asian chives which I might chop up and add instead. Other things I've seen some people do, I haven't done myself, are using something sweeter like an Asian pear or apple in the kimchi to add a little bit of extra sweetness. So if you're making a few batches, try something different, you might find something you like better. But no matter what vegetables you use, the thing that makes kimchi exciting is the flavourful spicy paste that we add to the vegetables. So for that, we're going to need a few things. A thumb-sized piece of ginger. Now if you like ginger like me, make it kind of a swollen thumb-sized piece. You want about 8 cloves of garlic, which is roughly 1 bulb. Alternatively, you can use minced garlic and use about 1 tablespoon of that. And half an onion. Now we'll also be making a little bit of a porridge to thicken the paste and to add a bit of sweetness. And for that you'll need some glutinous rice flour and some brown sugar. We'll also add some fish sauce, which will give a good depth of flavour, and some saeujeot, which is a kind of fermented salted shrimp, which will really help to bolster that seafood flavour. And last but definitely not least, it wouldn't be kimchi without the vibrant red colour and of course a spicy kick. Now for this we use gochugaru, which is a Korean red pepper powder. Now the rice flour, the gochugaru and the saeujeot might be hard to find at your local supermarket, but if you've got an Asian grocery store around, they should be pretty well stocked there. Now the best place to start is by preparing the wombok. Now the idea is to take these crispy cabbage leaves and add salt to them so that the salt draws out the moisture and makes the leaves a little bit softer. Now traditionally the way this is done is by splitting the wombok up into quarters and by sprinkling salt in between the leaves, which will help draw out the moisture. What I like to do first instead is just chop the leaves up into bite-sized pieces. It's a bit less fiddly and in my opinion the results are kind of similar. So I'll grab a bowl, sharp knife, chop off the base, and then I'll just start pulling off the leaves. So now I've got a bowl full of the cabbage leaves, and you'll often get a fair bit of dirt in between the leaves, so it's worth giving them a bit of a rinse before you chop them into pieces. Now once I've rinsed my cabbage leaves, I'll take them out into piles of 5. That'll just make them easier to cut into bite-sized pieces. Then just take each pile and just chop them into pieces. Anyway, now that you're done, you've got a bowl full of cabbage. Now you might be thinking, it's a lot of cabbage. We've only got a couple of jars. How's it going to fit? But basically the idea is that once we get all of the water out of this cabbage, it's going to shrink down a lot and become a lot denser. So for that, we're going to need some salt. So I'll add about half a cup of salt and I'll just sprinkle it on. And then you'll just want to toss it through the cabbage. Just get it kind of evenly distributed. Now it doesn't really matter how much salt you use because we're actually going to wash it off a little bit later on. And then once the salt's kind of distributed through the cabbage, I'll just add 2 cups of water. And then I'll just mix it all through and dissolve the salt. Now you can actually tell that the cabbage has shrunk down a lot already just by doing that. But the idea is that over the next hour and a half or so, all of that salty water is just going to draw out the moisture from the cabbage and you're going to be left with a still crispy but a lot softer cabbage leaf. So we're going to put this off to the side for about another hour and a half, giving it a toss every 20 minutes or so. And in the meantime, we'll prepare the rest of the kimchi. Now it's a good idea to make the sweet porridge next because we're going to have to let it cool down to room temperature before we add it to the paste. Now it's pretty straightforward. You just add a cup of water and just under a tablespoon of the rice flour and just stir it over a medium heat until it starts bubbling. So you can see after a few minutes it's just starting to bubble up nicely. So at this point we'll just add a tablespoon of brown sugar and mix it until all the ingredients are combined. And once everything's together, you just want a nice, slightly thick porridge, nothing too thick, with everything mixed together. So then we'll just turn off the stove and put it to the side. Now it's important to let this cool down to room temperature. If you've got little lumps in there at all, you can strain it out. This is looking pretty good. So while this is cooling, we'll prepare the rest of our vegetables. So the next step is to chop the rest of our vegetables into bite-sized pieces. So take your radish, give it a peel, and slice it thinly into little matchsticks. And then do the same thing with the carrot. So I actually recently bought a veggie spiralizer, so I gave that a try. It actually worked pretty well. So for the spring onions, I like to cut them into bite-sized pieces that are about 2 to 3 centimeters long. So that's our veggies done. Now it's time to prepare the ingredients for our spice paste. So take the skin off your ginger and thinly slice. Then peel your garlic and give them a bit of a crush. Lastly, roughly chop your onion. Then pop it all in a food processor and blitz. Next, take 2 generous teaspoons of saeujeot and dice it finely. Now we're going to add all of the ingredients of the spice paste together. So take your saeujeot. I also like to add a couple of teaspoons of the brine for a little bit of extra flavour. Next, add your garlic, ginger and onion paste. Now if you don't have a food processor, you can just dice these finely. And the onion isn't really strictly necessary. Adds a little bit of an extra flavour, but just as long as you have the garlic and ginger, you'll be fine. Next, we'll add about a 1/4 cup of fish sauce. Now, fish sauce is pretty strong, so if you're not too keen on the taste, just add a little bit less. Not really rocket science. There we go. And once your porridge is cooled, it's time to add that to the bowl. And then it's time to add your gochugaru. Now, it depends how spicy you want it. I like to add about 1/3 cup. So if you like a bit more, maybe use half. Want a bit less, maybe use 1/4. I probably wouldn't use less than 1/4 because otherwise you won't get that red colour and flavour that kimchi's really characteristic of. So this will form the base of our spice paste, so just go ahead and mix it together until it's nice and smooth. So you can see we've got that really nice red colour. It's a nice thickness. Little bits of garlic and ginger there, which will taste really nice. And the smell's pretty good too. And so by the time you've got your veggies prepared and your spice paste put together, it's probably been at least half an hour, so it's a good time to go and check your cabbage. So you can see that after even a short period of time, these leaves are absolutely drenched with the water that's coming out of them from the salt. and things are packed down a lot more tightly, the leaves are still kind of crisp, which is what we want. And so we'll just give them a toss every 20 minutes or so and leave them for a total of about an hour and a half, and they should be good. Fun fact, kimchi was sent into space. When Kosan, the first South Korean astronaut, was preparing for his mission to the International Space Station in 2008, presumably he took a look at the menu and noticed kind of a distinct lack of side dishes. Now it says a lot about how important kimchi is to the Koreans that 3 separate government institutes spent millions of dollars and several years developing a version of kimchi that was safe for space. And even then, one of the scientists was still experimenting on kimchi that was made by his mum. Now they were worried that the cosmic radiation would actually mutate the bacteria in the food and make them harmful, so they had to make a version without bacteria that didn't spoil quickly, retained its flavour, and probably most importantly, didn't stink up the space station with the smell of fermented cabbage. Good news is, it worked, and kimchi was consumed in orbit on the International Space Station. So it's been about an hour and a half, and as you can see, there's just so much water that's come out of these cabbage leaves. And I mean, we barely added any water at all. So most of this moisture has actually come out of the leaves themselves. And so after about that amount of time, it's time to drain and rinse your cabbage leaves. So we'll take our bowl and just drain all that water from the cabbage leaves. Next, we'll give it a good rinse in cold water. And that'll just get a lot of that residual salt off our leaves. So it doesn't really matter too much how much salt you use, because you're basically just going to drain it and rinse it off anyway. Now once we've given them a good rinse, I like to just get as much moisture out of the leaves as I can without crushing them, mainly because when you add the radish to the spice mix, it's going to lose a little bit of water as well, and so you don't want too much liquid in your jar. So just squeeze out the cabbage leaves and pop them in the bowl. So there's our cabbage, nicely wilted down, and it's ready to add to our vegetables and our spice mix. So once that's done, it's simply a matter of adding all your ingredients together. So add the rest of your veggies to the bowl and give them a quick toss. So you've got a really good mix of veggies here, nice variation in colours and textures, and we're ready to add our spice paste. Now if I could give you one tip in this video, it's to pop on a pair of kitchen gloves before you add the spice paste. I mean, the gochugaru is really good. Oh, yeah, okay. All right, let's try that again. If I could give you one tip, it's to put on some gloves before you add the gochugaru. Come on. Gochugaru, really good at giving that nice red color to kimchi. Also really good at giving that nice red color to everything in your kitchen. So, once you've successfully put your gloves on, like so, take your spice paste and add it to the veggies. All right, next step, just toss it all together. And it's really at this point that you start to see it all come together and look and smell and feel like kimchi. So I feel like it's a good idea to show you the bowl, but that would require me taking off my gloves and putting another set back on. And that didn't really work out too well for me. So I'm just going to put it straight into the jars. So what we'll do is just one handful at a time. Carefully just pop it in your jars, trying not to spill any onto the bench. So after a few handfuls, it's a good idea to try to squash it down as much as you can. And something like this really helps to pack it down. So we just kind of mush it towards the bottom of the jar and just keep adding the kimchi. Now if you want to make things simpler with a little bit less effort, you don't actually have to make that porridge that we made earlier. You know, the first couple of batches of kimchi that I made, I didn't actually put the porridge in. All I'd do is I'd just get the veggies, all of the rest of the stuff in the spice mix, the red pepper powder, and I'd just combine all of it into a bowl together. It actually works out pretty well. I mean, the porridge I think is a good idea because it adds a bit of a depth of flavour that I reckon is probably a little bit more authentic, but you can skip it. And I might start adding to the other jar. I mean, you can see from there just the colour looks absolutely incredible. But this is kind of the ideal situation. You know, we're getting nice densely packed kimchi, but we'll end up with a little bit of extra room at the top of each jar. So we'll just pour in whatever remaining liquid we have, which in this circumstance isn't very much. And then what I like to do is I like to use these little fermentation buddies I got on eBay. Just pop over the top of the vegetables, and what they'll do is it'll help keep the vegetables under the level of the brine. The idea with fermentation is that it's an anaerobic process, so that means without oxygen, and the ideal situation is to keep all your vegetables underwater so they're starved of oxygen. And that's the environment that the lactobacillus that we've got on the vegetables is going to be fermenting them and creating the flavors that we're looking for. Next, we'll just do a bit of a cleanup. All right guys, so that's the hard part done. So we've got our cabbage and our radish, which have their own naturally occurring bacteria on them. And we've submerged them in a slightly sweet, slightly salty liquid, which is going to be the perfect medium for their growth. And so all that's left to do is to just pop our lids on, get a good seal, and we'll put them aside to ferment. So I like to put mine in the cupboard. There's no reason why you can't keep them on the bench. I've done that before. Probably a good idea, especially if you're using a container that hasn't really got a great seal or something plastic that might split, is to put a tea towel down or something to soak up any moisture that might come out of the jars if it happens. Last thing you want is to have smelly, fermenting fish sauce goop going all around your cupboards. Not a good look. So I'll put these away. So we've added cabbage, radish, gochugaru, heaps of different ingredients, but with fermentation, the most important ingredient is time. And we're not talking about the herb, so we'll come back in 24 hours and see how we're going. So it's been about a day, so it's time to check and see how things are going. So even though it's only been about 24 hours, you can actually see some good signs of fermentation happening already. And that just goes to show how quickly kimchi does ferment. Now, if you look really closely, you can see some bubbles forming in the liquid. Now that's carbon dioxide, and that's being produced as the lactobacillus on our vegetables converts the carbohydrates in the cabbage and the radish into lactic acid and carbon dioxide. And that's one of the main ways we can actually tell that fermentation's happening. Now those bubbles are going to be a lot more obvious if I actually just give this a bit of a push. And you can just see all that carbon dioxide rushing to the surface. And that's a pretty good sign that the fermentation's doing pretty well. Now because all that gas is being produced, the pressure inside the jar is actually going to increase. So it's a good idea every day or two to come along and just pop the top off each jar and let the pressure escape. Now I'll go into this in a bit more detail in a later video, hopefully, but the bacterial growth and these fermentation reactions happen a lot faster at warmer temperatures. So the temperature that you ferment at is actually going to affect the speed at which your food ferments. And if you're in a Queensland summer like I am, where the temperature's about 30 degrees on average during the day, these are probably going to be done in about 72 hours total. And if you leave them go for a week, like I sometimes do, the flavor's actually going to be pretty strong. So the best way to go is to just check them every couple of days, taste a little bit, and see how you're going. So I'll see you guys in another couple of days, and I reckon at that point we'll be pretty much done. So we're 3 days into the fermentation now, so the best way to see if the kimchi is ready is to pop the top open and have a taste. So you can actually see how much fermentation has been happening as all of those carbon dioxide bubbles rush up from the bottom of the jar as the pressure releases. And that's going to be even more obvious if I give it a little bit of a push. So after all that preparation and fermentation, it's finally time to taste our kimchi. So we'll grab some clean tongs or a fork and we'll just remove these fermentation buddies from the jars. And then we'll just grab some kimchi. Now in terms of flavour, you'd like it to be acidic because of the lactic acid being produced in the fermentation, but it's also nice to retain a little bit of crispness in the cabbage leaf. If you want your cabbage leaf to be softer, or if you want the flavour to be stronger and more sour, you can ferment it for longer. So there's only one way to find out. It smells pretty good. And tastes even better. It's already pretty acidic after only 72 hours, and so that's why you really want to check as you go along, otherwise you might end up fermenting it for longer than you need to. And the cabbage leaf is still quite crispy, so it's pretty nice. So once we're done, we just pop the lids back on the jars and put them in the fridge. So in the fridge, the fermentation will still happen, but just at a really, really low level, almost non-existent. And so the kimchi will keep quite safely in the fridge for months and months. I mean, if I've actually told you the right stuff and it tastes decent, you should end up eating it way, way before it goes bad. All right guys, that's how I make kimchi. I like this version because it's really tasty and I love the ginger flavor and the umami depth that you get from the fish sauce and the saeujeot. It's a good probiotic and it goes great as a side dish with lunch or dinner, or you could even make kimchi soup or kimchi fried rice. Or just do what I do and eat it as a snack. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I'm planning on making some more videos around fermenting and pickling, so if you're keen to see them, then subscribe to the channel. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to give it a like. And let me know in the comments what you want to see me ferment next. That didn't last long, probably going to have to make some more soon. Well, thanks for watching episode 1 of Pickels Pickles.